Shines from the Spirit with glorious light. Confident living cleanses my soul, giving the Spirit fullest control. I'm Mike Costello, and I'm here with Dr. Iris Freelander, and in the next few minutes, we'd like to talk to you about affirmations and denials. In our belief system, in New Thought, metaphysical Christian philosophy and theology, we believe that the value of affirmations and denials are great in strengthening our spiritual being and empowering our lives and helping us live day to day. I'd like to tell you a little bit about affirmations and denials. Maybe it's a new concept or they're new words for you. Affirmations are simply statements of spiritual reality. In our church, we say very often that they're statements of fact, things that already are, not something after which we're seeking or not something that we're hoping to have happen, but things that already are in spiritual reality. An example would be, I am a child of God. Any one of us can use that statement. I am a child of God. That is an affirmation. It is a positive statement. Whether you believe you're a child of God, whether you feel like you're a child of God, whether you behave like you're a child of God is not important. What is important is that you are a child of God. And even if you are not the manifestation yet of what it is that we are affirming or what it is that anyone is affirming, we believe that the reality is that that affirmation is truth even before it appears to be manifest in our lives. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Denials are statements, similarly, of the denial of the circumstance or situation or condition and its ability to damage or hurt you. We're not talking about denying the reality of something in the physical life that we would experience, but we are talking about denying the influence that that has over us. In other words, if we have cancer or if we have another serious illness, we're not denying the fact that we have the illness, but we deny the power that it has over us. And we can say that this illness does not have power to the detriment of my life. I do not draw this disease or this illness to me. And in that process, we affirm that which is real. We deny the power of negative thoughts and unreality over our lives. And hopefully in the next few minutes, we'll make this a little clearer for those of you who are new to this way of thinking and to this thought process. Iris, in our church, we use affirmations. You can't come to church and listen to me talk without using affirmations. And that affirming nature or affirming statement is something that is so fundamental to our teaching and our belief.
Yes, and it's so effective too. And you often have had us say words and thoughts have molding power. So let us careful be, knowing that we're building our eternity. And indeed we are. And we can look back through history and see that that is shown. People have used affirmations for centuries, forever, and to very good effect. And by the same token, if they use an affirmation that's of a negative factor, then they will have the negative effect in their bodies. Like if they say, I'm so tired, I'm tired all the time, well, they're going to stay tired all the time. But if they'll say, I'm energized and through God's grace, I'm stronger ever yet, then they will be stronger.
Absolutely. And they're calling out that which already is. They're not making themselves stronger,
Yes.
but they're making themselves behave according to truth.
Yes.
And so often we don't behave, or the outpicturing or experience of our life is not the truth. The truth is always of God, and everything of God is good. And so that means that everything that is not of God, that is negative in our lives, is not unreal. It is real in this physical life and in this physical sense. But if we could call out of ourselves the spiritual truth, we can deny the effect that those negative experiences have on our lives.
Yes, and we know that they do have an effect on our lives, and we know that the positive affirmations do. And we can see that happen in people, just in people's lives. Mm-hmm. Those people who are positive in their outlook toward life are going to be healed, and everyone's going to have some illness one time or another, without question, but their healing is ever so much better when they have the positive outlook, and the healing is terrible when they don't. We've seen, I used to have a friend whose mother went to bed and stayed in bed the last 15 years of her life because she said, I'm so tired, I don't want to move a finger, and I'm not going to move out of this bed. And she didn't. And she, of course, lost all mobility and her muscles atrophied, and she wasn't able after a time to get up. But my friend thought that she got up out of bed occasionally and exercised her muscles. Well, in any event, that mother stayed in bed because was just too tired to move, she thought. So she copped out on life. And what a terrible waste of life.
And exactly what you said is true. She thought
Yeah.
that she was tired.
Yes.
And so, because she thought she was tired, she agreed, her body, her physical being agreed with her mental proclamation that she was tired. And I think a real important statement that we all use is these I ams.
Yes.
I am what? What is it that we say we are? I am tired. I am worn out. I am sick. I am poor. I am, I am, I am. And if we use positive I ams, I am strong, I am well, I am happy. And if we're able to affirm these things in the face of difficulty, in other words, if we're tired, if our physical being is tired, and if we say, I am renewed in the presence of God and I am strong, when we know in our human thinking that our physical body is tired, our physical body may indeed be tired and need its rest, but we're able to call into our being the resonance of health and strength and vitality by simply affirming the reality that we are strong and that we are filled with the vitality of God.
And so then we are. It's just like Apollonius of Tyana put energy into certain talismans, into certain places in the earth. And centuries later, that energy was still as strong as when he left it there, because he was able to use affirmation so effectively. And that's what putting a talisman into various points of the earth would be his own affirmation. And so if we look at the incidents like that, we can see how important it is every word we say and every affirmation we utter that would be so very, very effective. And of course, that's what spiritual healing does. We balance the body of the meridian, the energy patterns of the person we're helping to heal. And so each person has the meridian lines, 24 meridian points around their body. And in spiritual healing, that's helped to balance. But if they don't keep the positive aspect of being, then the healing will not be effective on a permanent basis. But if they can hold that energy strong, then through their own positive thoughts, then they won't. Then the healing is effective.
And that same principle operates in all the aspects of our life. If, for instance, we don't have the resources that we need, the money that we need,
Yes.
if our checkbook is empty and we believe that we're deep in debt and we really have our back against the wall, so to speak, and many people are faced with that at different times in their life. Many people are faced with that all of their life.
Yes.
And they believe and see the fact that there are limited resources and they really don't know what they're going to do. As we begin to affirm the prosperity truth about life, because we know there's plenty of money.
Yeah.
The fact is that it just doesn't know where we are in some cases. And so the aspect of life is to be able to draw it to us and us to it,
Yeah.
to have our need met. And that's not talking about any kind of hocus pocus to create financial wealth. It's talking about having our financial needs met, being able to pay our bills and to raise our children and to pay our rent and meet the expenses of daily life. But if we're able, in the face of limited financial resources or even abject poverty, to affirm the prosperity of the universe and to affirm the abundant supply that God makes ready for all of us, then we begin to open the channels through which God will guide and direct us to where we need to be. And where we may need to be is somewhere in a job earning some money.
Yes. And there's in New Thought, there's this strong belief, and it's not only in New Thought, it's all spiritual aspects, I assume, that God gave mankind free will. Because of our free will, we're free to affirm whatever we wish, and whatever we affirm is going to happen in our lives. So because of our free will, there are those on the inner planes of being who can't help us unless we ask for that help. So a lot of people say, well, I can't bother God with trivia. Well, it's not a matter of bothering God with trivia, but every aspect of our lives are important to Creator God and to those on the inner who work with us. We have guardian angels and other helpers from the inner planes of being who work with us, but they can't work with us until we ask for help.
Mhm. And as we ask for help, we do that by using the simple affirmations that we talk about, affirming the truth
Yes.
despite the appearances. And I think that it's important also to think about the aspect of denial, which we talked about at the beginning of this program. And we use more affirmations than we use denials, but the power of denial is also a strong point to remind us that we're not under the bondage of what appears to be. Instead, we can see beyond that and we can claim that which is ours. And if we take, for instance, the financial aspect, if we have not enough money in the checkbook or in the bank to meet our expenses, we can affirm the fact that abundant supply is ours, and we can deny the fact that that checkbook or that this limit is going to impede our ability to live a prosperous, abundant life. And so that process of affirming and denying in balance, but not denying the experience as much as we deny the power that that experience has to touch our lives.
Yes. Well, I've been teaching that for a long time, and one thing I taught one evening is be careful what you. Everyone says, be careful what you ask for. You might get it, and if you ask, be explicit when you need something. And there was someone who wanted a big check, and this is a true story. They wanted a big check. Well, they received in the mail a huge check, but it was for about $5. And what they really wanted was $5,000 in a normal sized check. But they received that big check. So we need to be careful what we ask for and how we ask it, because it will come in like manner. So we need to ask for ways we can see that we need to help, that we can help ourselves. And of course, in an emergency, we can ask for outright help. But I think that if we're wise, we're going to ask for ways, to be shown ways where we can help ourselves.
Mhm. And not be so affected. And so much of this program over the last year and all that we do in the church is built upon the fact that we can't base our lives on the appearances.
Exactly.
That just because it appears that we have an illness, just because it appears that we have limit or lack, just because it appears that a relationship has ended or we're in crisis of one kind or another, doesn't mean that that's really where we are. We have to see beyond that. And of course, the way shower Christ Jesus told us over and over again to have eyes to see and ears to hear. And what he was saying was to see beyond, to have vision,
Yes.
and to have the vision of what is really true for each one of us. We're closely aligned with Unity, and Unity's founders are just wonderfully empowered and spiritual people. Myrtle Fillmore was the co-founders of Unity, who used the affirmation in her own personal life when she was dying of tuberculosis at the turn of the century, when it was almost hopeless. And she simply used the affirmation, I am a child of God, therefore I do not inherit sickness. And yet the doctor said that she had tuberculosis.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone said she had tuberculosis. She knew that she had tuberculosis in her physical body, but she affirmed that she was a child of God, and therefore she, the true Myrtle Fillmore, did not inherit sickness. Maybe the physical body did, but Myrtle Fillmore, the spirit, spiritual being,
Yeah.
did not inherit that sickness. And as that she began to awaken, as she writes in her books and writings and told during her life, as she began to awaken that reality within her inner person, that she was a child of God and therefore she did not inherit sickness, she didn't concern herself with the sickness. Even though it was there and it was limiting, she concerned herself with building up the affirmation that she was and is a child of God, and therefore she did not inherit sickness. And the sickness began to fade and fade and fade and fade. And as she said, it took many, many months. And it wasn't discouraging to see it go bit by bit, but she began with the affirmation. She began by affirming what was true. And as she affirmed what was true, that which was negative fell away.
Fell away.
Yeah.
Well, as you teach so eloquently, we are mind, body, and spirit. We're not just lesser than that. And so if we live from the spiritual aspect of being, which is our higher self, then we are negating the illnesses of the physical body. And we're making our mind work in coordination with spirit So if we can always remember that, then we would be healed whenever we have a sickness, and we would have much less sickness. And you and I can look around at the people we know who stay healthy and strong, and they usually have a pretty good attitude toward life, and they are able to look to God for help. And sometimes we just inadvertently get sickness, but then those who do, they're healed in the same manner, unless it's meant that they're not to heal. There are those from the inner planes who teach us that we have a pre-birth agreement, and that pre-birth agreement entails when we're going to die, when we're going to leave this physical body behind. And so if it's our pre-birth agreement that we're going to die at age 10, then we do, or 20 or 30 or whatever. Well, but we can live healthfully and strongly in between. And if we do get an illness, then we can drop it behind just by living from the higher self, as you described Myrtle Fillmore having done.
Mhm. And that's true of every aspect of our life,
Exactly.
of health, of wealth, of peace of mind, of relationships, of jobs, of all of the things that we do in our lives. And it is that connectiveness between the divine and the physical. And I think so often even those of us who are involved in spiritual work and people who understand truth teaching and spiritual teaching, so often aren't able to bring the two, both the physical and the spiritual, together. And we're in this physical experience for a good reason. We're here to learn the lessons that we need to learn. And so often we want to, just as you said a few minutes ago, we're not just bodies walking around without spirits, and we're not just spirits walking around without bodies, or we'd be out of this life.
Invisible.
Yes, and so we're in this life, and we're connected to the physical. And even though the physical is transient and changing, it is real for our spiritual edification, strength, and growth. And so we need to connect ourselves with that physical aspect of life, and we need to embrace that physical aspect of life. And when we talk about affirmations and denials, it's very, very important that we not talk about denying the reality of something, and also being cautious about what it is that we're claiming in terms of our physical being and our spiritual being. An example would be going back to people that have cancer, and many people have cancer and are challenged with it, or any other disease. And so often we begin to identify with the disease, even to the extent that I've heard people in my counseling, and you have too, I know, that would speak of my cancer.
Yeah.
Well, at that moment, they have united themselves with that disease. And the reality is that the denial is, it's not my cancer.
Yeah.
It's not their cancer.
Yeah.
It's not God's cancer. It is a physical disease, a physical manifestation. The same would be true of poverty. It's not God's poverty. It's not God's will that anyone be poor. And it's not my poverty that I claim, although people claim that poverty, and they claim that disease, or they claim that negative experience. And it's very important that we not do that, and that we go back to the teaching that we espouse so often about words and thoughts have molding power. The words and thoughts, the words that we speak, the thoughts that we think, create the reality of who and what we are in this physical life. And if we can affirm the truth, an example, I heard someone who was talking about their arthritis recently, and they were talking about how hard it was for them to manipulate their hands. And it was a lady who loved to cook, and she had a terrible time with her hands. She couldn't cook and she couldn't sew, which were the loves of her life. And so she was talking to us about this debilitation and how difficult it is, and how frustrated she is in her physical impediment. And she made the statement to me, "These darn hands." And I thought, oh my goodness, because that, of course, is something that she's come to identify with, because the hands don't function like they used to. But what she's doing is really cursing her hands.
Yes.
And giving strength and telling her hands,
Yeah.
you're useless. Why are you doing this? Much like you would chastise a child.
Yeah.
And of course, the physical body will respond, because it's alive, it's a part of us. And so if it is chastised, it's not, oh, those darn hands, it's those blessed hands.
Yes.
And as we begin to bless these aspects of our life that we sometimes think on the surface ought to be condemned or damned or darned, we need to bless them instead. And for people that go through great pain, one of the things that we know and that's very, very useful in controlling pain is to begin, and of course, the Eastern philosophies are great at this technique, and Buddhists do a wonderful job of connecting with the pain,
Yeah.
of being one with the pain, so that it doesn't become a fight.
Yeah.
Now it becomes, all right, I have this pain, and yes, it's here, but I'm going to begin now to not give it power and not to allow it to make me uncomfortable and to debilitate me and limit me. I may have the pain, but the pain's role is changed, and my role to my relationship with the pain has changed. Just like my relationship with my illness, or my relationship with my poverty, or my limit, or my lack, or my relationship with the persons in my life changes completely. And part of that process is to give way to hate, and give way to dislike, and give way to separation, and instead embrace love in all of
Exactly.
the aspects. And
Exactly.
that's when the affirmation, and that's the greatest affirmation, is to affirm the love of God in our lives.
Yes. Well, that's what the great way shower, the Lord Christ, came here and taught us. Love ye one another as I've loved you. And love, and the golden rule, love your neighbor as yourself. So that's an important aspect, to love ourselves, to accept ourselves, to love ourselves, and do all we can to change whatever we want to about ourselves, but to accept what is and the inevitable, to accept it. And when we accept, we are going a great distance in positive living. Whatever we have to accept that this is. It's like you were talking about illnesses of the body, or sometimes who knows why, but they have to be. But if we accept, yes, my body is not functioning well, but my spirit is strong, as you use the example of Myrtle Fillmore, then live from the spiritual aspect of being.
Mhm. And as we live from that spiritual aspect, sometimes the physical manifestation changes.
Yes.
Sometimes it doesn't.
Yes.
If it doesn't change, then we are still empowered because we have stopped the power that that physical impediment had over us.
Right, we've gained a new strength, a spiritual strength. And of course, I teach, and you do too, that we are co-creators with God, the whole, with Creator God. As a co-creator, it's up to us to create. When God gave us free will, we can create what we wish. And so it would be a sad penalty if we created negativity in other people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
Then it would come back on us like a boomerang, and we would have to pay then that penalty. But we are free to create whatever we choose. And if we choose health, happiness, wholeness, prosperity, then that's what we'll have.
Mm-hmm. And as we affirm the spiritual reality in life, then we claim that which God wants us to have, and which is the will of God,
Yes.
not something that changes from
Yes.
time to time. So often people believe or want to say that it's the will of God that this happens or that happens, and the will of God doesn't change. We change. The will of God for us is always good and only good, and the will of God for us is love and only love. And so anything that is not of love and is not of good isn't within the scope of the will of God at all. And so the will of God is that we would affirm the relationship that we have with that divine presence always, and that we would deny the limiting aspects of our physical life. But circumstances and situations present themselves, and we're not going to avoid that. We don't want to avoid the experiences of life. We don't even want to avoid the negative experiences of life as much as we want to be able to go through and glow through those experiences.
Exactly. How wonderfully said. And we might summarize what people can do to help themselves. And one is to stay in a positive aspect of being. And a good way to manage that is through deep breathing. Just breathe deeply, inhaling and exhaling slowly, and filling the lungs fully, and affirming something as whatever feels good to that person, as like, I am a child of God, or I am whole, healthy, and strong, as they do their deep breathing.
Mm-hmm. And in that process, we begin to center ourselves in the presence and power of God. And that presence and power will sustain us. And I think it's important when we talk about affirmations. So often we use affirmations, and people will tend to ask me for an affirmation. And I'm happy to give people affirmations, but we really need to build our own affirmations.
Yes.
And they will come from within us, and they will be the affirmative statement, the truth statement that we need for our lives. And it's not a mystical or magical thing, and it's nothing that we have to have a prayer book for,
Yes.
although we could can certainly get them from a book, but they can come to us very naturally.
Yes, we don't need a mantra. We need to think of what our own inner need is and go with our own feelings. So often we mistrust our own feelings, and we need to go with that.
We need to go with our feelings. We need to feel the way that we feel and allow ourselves to feel the way that we feel, and then begin to build upon the positive aspects of that experience. In some cases, it's negative. The other thing I think we could caution people about and invite them into our exercise of affirmative life and use of affirmations is to be cautious of what the I ams are in their life.
Yeah.
And when they say, I am anything, it should always be positive.
Positive.
Positive and uplifting. It should never be negative. We should never say, I am sick, I am tired. And the other thing we should be cautious about, and I've said this many times before, you've heard me say it, when people get an illness and they go to the doctor and have something as simple as the flu or the cold, how many times have you heard people come back and say, the doctor told me I've got the worst case of the flu that he's ever seen? Well, first of all, it's probably not the worst case of the flu that he's ever seen. And if it was, what a thing to say, because we don't want to build upon that consciousness. We want instead to build upon the consciousness that we're well and that we're strong and that we're empowered. And so as we begin to draw upon these negative statements, I'm sick, I have the worst case of the flu that anybody's ever seen, my operation took 11 hours, more than yours did, these kinds of things, we need to be cautious of what it is that we're affirming and creating.
Yes. I know a lady who had cancer of the bone marrow, and she used to always tell her children, I'm bone weary, and you're hurting me to my bones. And she would always say things like that. And who knows, it might have been a premonition, but it might have been that affirmation caused the condition in her bones.
Sure, and the affirmation that she used certainly couldn't have helped her in any way. And so we invite you to use affirmations in a positive way to affirm the reality of God's presence in your life and to deny the effect and the power that any negative influence has over your life. And so Dr. Freelander and I hope that the information we've shared with you has been useful. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Comforts my heart from such a blessing I can't depart. Confident living helps me expand visions of value, the kingdom at hand. Confident living, talent to win, gift of the Spirit moves from within. Confident living writes every moment.